Now, the purpose of the Bible is to testify of Jesus Christ. The Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, points to Christ.
The Bible is true in a very strange way. What you do as an educated person is sample that structure that constitutes the sum total of the texts of our civilization.
Because if those four things are true, that there's truth, that God exists, that miracles are possible, and the New Testament is reliable enough to let us know that the resurrection occurred, then Christianity is true. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity is true.
So, what is the food you give to the soul? It is reading the Bible, the Word of God. And I don't care who you are, you cannot live a victorious life if you neglect Bible reading and Bible study.
But what we have at stake here is far more than that. You know, your life depends on this book. So read it.
Pulpit Commentary, Exodus chapter 13 verses 1 through 16. Sanctification of the firstborn. In connection with the deliverance from death of the Israelite firstborn by the blood of the Lamb, and still further to fix the remembrance of the historical facts in the mind of the nation, Moses was commissioned to declare all the firstborn of Israel for all future time, and all the firstborn of their domesticated animals holy to the Lord. There was, perhaps, already in the minds of men a feeling that peculiar dignity attached to the firstborn in each family, and this feeling was now strengthened by the assignment to them of a sacred character. God claimed them, and also the firstborn of beasts, as his own. The clean beasts became his by sacrifice, but the unclean ones could not he similarly treated, and therefore had to be redeemed, from verse 13, by the sacrifice of clean animals in their place. The firstborn of men became at the first institution of the new ordinance God's ministers. But as this system was not intended to continue, it was announced that they too would have to be redeemed, verses 13 and 15. The exact mode of redeeming them was left to be settled afterwards, and will be found in Numbers chapter 3 verses 40 through 51, Numbers chapter 18, verse 16. Verse 1 on the true grammatical nexus of this verse. See note on Exodus chapter 12 verse 51. The injunctions of verse 2, and probably those of 3 through 15, were given to Moses on the very day of the setting forth, most likely at Sukkot in the evening. Verse 2, sanctify unto me, not by any positive ceremony, but by regarding it as set apart unto the Lord. Verse 12, made over to him, that is, as his own, all the firstborn. The Hebrew word used is masculine, and by its proper force limits the command to the firstborn males, who alone had been in danger from the 10th plague, whatever opened at the womb. This clause added definiteness, showing that firstborn did not contain any reference to any later birth, and that it applied to every case where a woman's first child was a male. It is mine, or it shall be mine. I claim it. Verse 3, and Moses said, without relating the directions given to Moses any further, the author passes to the directions given by him. He thus, here and elsewhere, avoids unnecessary repetition. Remember this day. The injunction came with great force at the close of the first day's journey, when the goodwill of the Egyptians had been shown, and the people had been helped, and speeded on their way, and felt that they were actually quitting the house of their bondage, and setting out for Canaan. By strength of hand the Lord brought you out, i.e., by his powerful protection has God brought you on your way thus far. Therefore, remember this day. And remember that nothing leavened is to be eaten on it. See Exodus chapter 12 verses 15 through 20. Verse 4, in the month of Abib. The name of the month had not been previously mentioned. Some have derived it from the Egyptian epiphi, as, however, Ab means greenness in Hebrew, and Abib green ears of corn, while Ibba meant fruit in Chaldee. From Daniel chapter 4 verses 12 and 14. And Abba means green herbs in Arabic. There is no need of a foreign derivation for the word. The month of greenness, or of green ears of corn, would be both appropriate and intelligible. Verse 5, the land of the Canaanites, etc. Compare Exodus chapter 3 verses 8 and 17. The 6 nations of these passages are reduced here to 5 by the omission of the Perizzites, one of the less important tribes, which he sware unto thy fathers to give thee. See Genesis chapter 15 verse 18, Genesis chapter 24 verse 7. And compare the comment on Exodus chapter 6 verse 8, that thou shalt keep this service. This injunction had been already given in Exodus chapter 12, verse 25, almost in the same words, but on the former occasion it was delivered to the elders, only now it is laid upon the whole people. Verse 6. 7 days. Compare Exodus chapter 12 verse 15. In the 7th day shall be a feast to the Lord. The feast lasted during the whole of the 7 days, but the first day and the last were to be kept especially holy. See Exodus 12 verse 16, Leviticus chapter 2 verses 6, 7, and 8. Verse 7 here again, the injunctions are mere repetitions of commands already given in chapter 12. See verses 15 and 19. Repetition was no doubt had recourse to in order to deepen the impression. Verse 8. And thou shalt shew thy son. Repeated from Exodus chapter 12 verses 26 and 27. Verse 9. And it shall be for a sign unto thee upon thy hand, and for a memorial between thine eyes. There can be no doubt that the Jewish system of tefillin, or phylacteries, grew mainly out of this passage, and was intended as a fulfillment of the commands contained in it. The tefillin were strips of parchment with passages of Scripture written upon them, and deposited in small boxes, which were fastened by a strap either to the left arm or across the forehead. The modern Jews argue that they were what Moses here intended, and that their employment began from this time. Some Christian commentators agree with them, but the great majority argue, from supposed probability, and from the entire absence of any reference to the actual wearing of tefillin in the Old Testament, that the custom must be, comparatively speaking, a modern one. It is generally supposed to have originated, with other superstitious practices, in the time of the Babylonish captivity. Those who take this view regard the words of Moses in the present passage as merely metaphorical, and compare them with Proverbs 3 verse 3, Proverbs chapter 6 verse 21, Proverbs chapter 7 verse 3. Kalish, however, observes with reason that at the injunction to write passages of the law on the doorposts of their houses, Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 9, Deuteronomy chapter 11 verse 20, was intended to be understood literally, and was literally carried out. Isaiah chapter 57 verse 8, the commands with respect to tefillin, which are coupled with them, Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 8, Deuteronomy chapter 11 verse 18, must have been similarly intended. And probability, which is said to be against the Mosaic origin of tefillin, may perhaps rather be urged in its favor. The Egyptian practice of wearing as amulets forms of words written on folds of papyrus tightly rolled up and sewn in linen, according to Wilkinson's Ancient Egyptians, Volume 3, page 364, is well attested. Would it not be in harmony with the general character of his legislation that Moses should adopt and regulate the custom, employing it to do honor to the law, and keep it in remembrance, without perhaps purging it wholly from superstitious ideas? Moses allowed the Israelites in many things for the hardness of their hearts, content if he could introduce some improvement without insisting at once on an impracticable perfection, that the law of the Lord may be in thy month. the Israelites are instructed from the first that the tefillin are to be a means to an end, and that the end is to be the retention of God's law in their recollection in their mouth, and therefore in their heart, since out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. Verse 10. This ordinance, the ordinance of unleavened bread. See Exodus chapter 12 verses 14 and 24. Verse 12, set apart. The expression is especially appropriate to the case of firstborn animals, which would have to be separated off from the rest of the flock or of the herd, and put aside for Jehovah, so as not to be mixed up and confounded with the other lambs, kids, and calves. The male shall be the Lord's. This limitation, implied in verse 2, is here brought prominently into notice. Verse 13. Every firstling of an ass. The ass was the sole beast of burthen taken by the Israelites out of Egypt. See Exodus chapter 20 verse 17. Neither the horse nor the camel was among their possessions in the wilderness. This is agreeable to the Egyptian monuments, by which the camel appears to have been rare in Egypt at this time, and the horse as yet mainly used for war, and by the nobles in their chariots, with a lamb or a kid. The word used is the generic one. See the comment on Exodus chapter 12 verse 3. If thou wilt not redeem it, then thou shalt break its neck. This enactment was evidently made to prevent a refusal to redeem. It would not require to be put in force, since by refusing under such a penalty a man would suffer pecuniary loss. All the firstborn of men among thy children, rather among thy sons, shalt thou redeem. Later on, the amount of the redemption money was fixed at 5 shekels of the sanctuary for each. See Numbers chapter 3 verse 47. Verse 14, when thy son asketh thee. Compare Exodus chapter 12 verse 26, and the comment ad loc. Verse 15, when Pharaoh would hardly let us go. Bather, when Pharaoh hardened himself against letting us go. At his last interview with Moses, Pharaoh had absolutely refused to let them go with their cattle. From Exodus 10 verse 24 through 27, and Moses had absolutely refused to go without them. I sacrifice all that open at the womb, being males, and being clean animals. The common sense of the reader or hearer is expected to supply the restriction of my children, rather, as in verse 13, of my sons. Verse 16, a sign, frontlets. See the comment on verse 9. It is the custom among the Jews to write this entire passage, Exodus chapter 13 verses 1 through 16, on 2 of the 4 strips of parchment contained in the tefillin. The others have inscribed on them Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4 through 9, and Deuteronomy chapter 11 verses 13 through 21. Verses 17 through 20, the direction of the journey, the direct road from Tanis to Palestine, a road much frequented under the 19th dynasty, lay along the coast of the Mediterranean and conducted to Philistia. If we look at the map and observe the position of Tanis, now sand on the old Tanitic branch of the Nile, now nearly dried up, we shall see that the route which would naturally suggest itself to anyone wishing to proceed to the Holy Land from Tanis would be one running almost due east, from Tanis to Pelusium, and from Pelusium, south of Lake Sarbones, to Rhinocolura, and thence, following the course of the coast to Gaza, Ascalon, and Ashdod, the chief towns of the Philistine country. It is true that a marsh region intervenes between Tanis and Pelusium, which might seem to bar the route, but the Egyptian remains show that, in the times of the 18th and 19th dynasties, this obstacle was surmounted by means of an embankment which was carried across it, and that a direct road thus connected the 2 cities. Moses, at this point of his narrative, being about to trace the onward march of the Israelites from Succoth to Etham, in the direction of the Red Sea, anticipated, it would seem, an objection on the part of his reader, who would naturally ask, why was not the direct route eastward taken, and Canaan entered on the southwest after some half-dozen marches? In verses 17, 18, he gives the reply. First, God led them. They did not determine their own route. And second, God would not lead them by the direct route, because it would have conducted them to the Philistine country. And the Philistines were strong, and would have resisted the invasion by force of arms. Hence it was that the southern, or southeastern route was taken in preference to the northern one, and that the second stage in the journey was from Sukkot to Etham, from verse 20. Verse 17, although that was near, rather because it was near, i.e., God did not, because it was near, lead them this way, but a longer one. Lest peradventure the people repeat when they see war. The Philistines were a powerful and warlike race half a century after this, in the time of Joshua, and were masters of the 5 important cities of Gaza, Askelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron, which seem to have formed a confederacy, from Joshua chapter 13 verse 3. It would appear that their strength was already considerable, and that the Israelites, though perhaps more numerous, were incapable of coping with them. Being wholly unaccustomed to war, the Israelites were therefore not allowed to take this route, which would have brought upon them at once a severe trial, and might have led to their voluntary return into Egypt. Verse 18, God led the people about, or led the people a circuit, i.e., made them take a circuitous route to Canaan, the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, i.e., by the southern wilderness, or what is now called the wilderness of Sinai. Kalish shows the wisdom of this course, how it gave time for the nation to be gradually accustomed to fatigues and hardships by a long and tiresome march in the desert, to learn obedience to their chief, and finally to be trained to military discipline and martial virtue by occasional expeditions against the weaker tribes of the desert. He errs, however, in ascribing the wisdom of the course taken to Moses, since Moses expressly declares that the conception was not his, but God's, and the children of Israel went up harnessed. The word here translated harnessed is generally thought to mean either with their loins girded, according to Onkelos, Kimchi, Kalish, or in military order, as according to Gesenius Lee Noble. Ewald, who inclines to the latter of these two senses, suggests that, strictly, it means in 5 divisions, viz., van, center, 2 wings, and rear guard. The word is, apparently, a derivative from Kamesh 5. Verse 19. Moses took the bones of Joseph, i.e., his body, which had been embalmed, and deposited in a mummy case, Genesis chapter 50 verse 26, most probably at Tanis, which was the capital of the shepherd kings, no less than of Manasseh. He had straitly sworn the children of Israel. See Genesis chapter 50 verse 25. Joseph, firmly believing in the promise of God to give Canaan to the descendants of Abraham, had made them swear to take his body with them when they left Egypt. The desire to be laid in their native earth was common to most of the nations of antiquity, and, in the case of the Israelites, was intensified by Canaan being the lot of promise. Jacob had had the same feeling as Joseph, and had been buried by Joseph in the cave of Machpelah, from Genesis chapter 50 verse 13. Verse 20, and they took their journey from Sukkot and encamped in Etham. On the probable position of Etham, see the introduction to this book. The word probably means house of turn, and implies the existence at the palace of a temple of the sun god, who was commonly worshipped as Tuna or Adam. The name, therefore, is nearly equivalent to Pithom, from Exodus chapter 1 verse 11, which means city of turn, but it is not likely that Moses designated the same place by two distinct appellations. The site of Etham, moreover, does not agree with that of the Patmos of Herodotus, which is generally allowed to be Pithom. Verses 21 and 22. The pillar of the cloud and of fire. Having stated in verse 17 that God led the Israelites and determined their route for them, the writer here proceeds to explain how this leading was accomplished. With extreme simplicity and directness he states that the conduct was effected by means of an appearance, which in the daytime was like a column or pillar of smoke ascending from earth to heaven, and in the night was like a pillar of fire. He considers the presence of God to have been in the pillar, which moved in front of the host, and showed them the way that they were to go. When it halted, they halted. When it advanced, they advanced. Their journeys being made as much in the night time as in the day, on account of the intense heat. The pillar took in the night the appearance of a column of fire, so as to be equally visible as by day. All attempts to give a rational explanation of the phenomenon are misplaced, since the writer, from whom alone we derive our information on the subject, clearly regarded it as miraculous, and both here and elsewhere, from Exodus chapter 14 verses 19, 20, 24, Exodus chapter 33 verse 9, Numbers chapter 12 verse 5, Numbers chapter 14 verses 11, speaks of it as a form under which God was pleased to show himself. There is little doubt that fire and smoke signals were already used by commanders of armies for much the same purpose as that which God now accomplished in this way. The Egyptian documents of the period contain indications of the usage, and it is found among the Arabians, the Greeks, and the Persians. The miracle was thus, in a certain sense, founded upon an existing custom, with the difference that God here gave the signals miraculously, which were wont to be given in a natural way by the human leaders of armies. He thus constituted himself the general of the host. Verse 21, the Lord went before them from Sukkot, at any rate perhaps even on the journey from Ramesses to Sukkot, in a pillar of cloud. The pillar was seen. The presence of Jehovah, though unseen, was believed to be in it, and to move it, to go by day and night, or so that they might march both by day and by night. Night marches are generally preferred by Orientals on account of the great heat of the days. The night marches of the Israelites are again mentioned in Numbers chapter 9, verse 21. Verse 22, he took none away. The last distinct mention of the cloud is in Numbers chapter 16, verse 42, after the destruction of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. There is perhaps a later allusion to it in Numbers chapter 20 verse 6. In Nehemiah it is said that the pillar of the cloud departed not from them, so long as they were in the wilderness, found in Nehemiah chapter 9 verse 19. And the same is implied, though not formally stated, in Numbers chapter 9 verses 15 through 23. There is no mention of the pillar of the cloud as still with the Israelites in the book of Joshua. Probably it was last seen on the journey from Beth Jezimoth to Abel Shittim in the rich Jordan Valley, from Numbers chapter 33 verse 49.